Okay. Does that look real?
In that particular shot, no, actually. It doesn't really, right? When you look close.
Does it need to be more blue?
Well,
you know,
no.
but does he look real?
No, none of us.
Does she look
Something looks very off about this. But no, he changes hues, don't you think?
Yeah.
Depending on the light. Sometimes he's blue, sometimes he's a little grayish.
So the new Ant-Man movie just came out, and I'm sure you guys are all aware of the headlines. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania becomes second rotten MCU movie based on Rotten Tomatoes because it has more negative reviews than positive reviews. So hello everyone from the very capitalist kingdom of Cambodia, and because we're going to be talking about capitalism and why capitalism is bad, thought I'd wear my commie Vietnam hat. Did you know in the communist utopia of Vietnam, you can't actually watch Marvel movies because they are banned for being terrible? No, I'm joking. You can watch all the Marvel movies you want in Vietnam, trust me. But I did really want to talk about how capitalism is ruining the MCU. Now, a lot of people, all these reactionary channels are saying, well, it's wokeness that is ruining the MCU. The MCU didn't used to be that woke, and because now it's all about identity politics and gender ideology and forcing some agenda down your throat, now it's terrible. Now, I made a video like over a year ago talking about how capitalism is ruining gaming and pointing out how many of the critiques that gamer bros often have of the gaming industry are really just them venting their problems of how capitalism is ruining gaming. But because they think they are capitalist, they don't want to say it. So I'm here today to make the case that the MCU is being ruined by capitalism, both artistically and of course through capitalist exploitation, because it's been a hot topic at the moment that Marvel does not treat its employees or contractors who do the special effects very well, and they also put way too much work on them, and that's why the special effects have been so bad for a number of years in Marvel movies, where everyone used to kind of agree that these movies look pretty good. Like, remember the first Iron Man? Think about how good the special effects are on Iron Man 2008. Compare that to the recent Ant-Man film. Compare that to even both Black Panther films. Compare that to a whole host of Marvel TV shows. And it's night and day, because they are just putting too much pressure on people who work in special effects to churn out these projects. And there are so many at the moment that the result is these films now just look terrible. And if you compare them like to the best of cinema, like maybe Denis Villeneuve films like Blade Runner and Dune, it's basically night and day. But even if you compare them to something like The Last of Us, and I was listening to Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann talking about employing Weta to design the clickers in episode 5 and how they mixed that in with like special effects clickers and how it gave us effect that you couldn't even tell the difference. And then I think about reading about how Marvel stuff is done and how they don't even wear real suits anymore. And I just think it's very clear Marvel just doesn't care so much about the craft more than pumping out these movies to make a profit. And if you're underpaying your workers, you're going to make even more profit. We'll start off by talking about the artistic degradation of Marvel films, and then we'll talk about the worker side. But before we go any further, please like the video, and in the comments, please let me know what is either the worst Marvel film or what is like the worst special effects you've seen in these Marvel movies. Also follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on Twitter, but also on Instagram. Instagram is where I'm posting about my travels around Southeast Asia, all saved in the highlight reels on my profile page. So if you care about that, check that out. Also consider becoming a patron. I'm trying to build up as many $1 to $3 patrons as possible, and the benefits include getting access to exclusive travel content I've made so far on the channel, 2 videos so far, going to be more coming in the future, and also the private patrons Discord server, and also getting access to my Nintendo Switch friend code. If you care about that, check out the Patreon, and also check out my subreddit and check out the second channel. All of the links to this stuff down in the description. So this video is broken down by sections in the timestamp, so you can, skip through if you don't care about certain parts. But basically, I'm going to be talking about my perception of the MCU and basically how I feel it's really lost its way. So I've made no secret that I really don't care for the MCU at the moment, and I really don't care for it as I've gotten older. The last MCU movie I watched in the cinema was the last Avengers movie, and I feel like a lot of people might be in the same boat as me because we grew up watching these movies. We grew up watching the first Iron Man movie and Captain America, and we kind of wanted to see what happened at the end of this, and once that was gone, We didn't really care about what happened afterwards. And I've also checked out some of the shows. Like, I like the Loki show. The Hawkeye show was fun as like something to watch at Christmas. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was nothing special, and I haven't watched anything else apart from them. Because we're talking about how like capitalism and the pursuit of profit has really ruined these movies, let's talk about the first Iron Man movies. I'm fully aware that some people watching this video like weren't even born when the first Iron Man movie came out, or they were too young to actually watch it. But the first Iron Man movie felt like such a big deal because it was so different to anything you'd seen so far. Of course, it came out the same year as The Dark Knight, which is like an amazing movie, the best superhero movie, but it brought something new with Robert Downey Jr. being like this billionaire who was also an arms dealer. Like, towards the start, he definitely felt like an anti-hero, and it had like great actors, great writing. It's all around like a great film. Like I said before, it also looks great as well. And overall, people saw this and thought, wow, Marvel are really doing something different. This movie is so good. And still today, it probably is the best MCU movie. It's definitely the one I like the most. Perfect encapsulation of everything that MCU can be. And I feel like even just moving on from that has shown you how these movies get worse. Now we find ourselves with something like Ant-Man, where literally to understand what's happening, you have to watch Loki on Disney+. And Ant-Man is just setting up future Avengers films and other films, because Ant-Man was never about like saving the world. It was about like these corporate villains in 1 and 2. So it's completely removing that because it's trying to set up everything else. Now the people in charge of the MCU do not care about artistic integrity. They don't care about making an interesting movie which really does something interesting and new like the first Iron Man movie did. They just care about making this a non-stop franchise where they can churn out movies forever. I think Kevin Feige recently said he wants this to go on for 80 years because that's the purpose of it. Not 80 years of quality movies which set like the industry standards and special effects and storytelling. 80 years of just non-stop movies that feel like they are video game cutscenes and feel like they all blend into one another because they're not really allowed to have their own identity. And before people get butthurt, I'm not saying you can't like these movies, but these movies are also designed to have mass appeal. So what you have is this machine that pumps out movies that the masses will consume and most people will enjoy as a throwaway popcorn film, but it really does nothing for cinema, but it increasingly takes over cinema. So everyone is either chasing this trend or they actually are involved in making MCU movies. Now, George Lucas is someone I really respect, and something really interesting he said in 2015 is that he never felt free to pursue his own artistic visions. That's why he sold Star Wars, so he could make stuff he cared about and make stuff based on his own like artistic passion. Because what he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, is that Soviet filmmakers were more free to be true to their artistic vision because they didn't have to worry so much about capitalist profit and the pursuit of profit, where he said, in America, every movie you make is in a narrow box because you're trying to make as much money as possible.
One of the reasons I retired is so I could make movies that aren't popular. Because in the world we live in the system we've created for ourselves in terms of it's a big industry, you cannot lose money. You're forced to make a particular kind of movie. And I used to say this all the time when people, back when Russia was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And they'd say, oh, but aren't you so glad that you're in America? I said, well, I know a lot of Russian filmmakers. They have a lot more freedom than I have. All they have to do is be careful about criticizing the government. Otherwise, they can do anything they want.
And so what do you have to do?
You have to adhere to a very narrow line of commercialism.
And George Lucas definitely isn't wrong, because if you watch some clips of old Soviet films, often the stuff you see is so ahead of American films, and it's just pretty amazing, like the techniques they employ, especially to do with like all the extras and the camera work. It really is something very interesting to watch. How movies made outside of the film capitalist market really have this ability to take chances. Sure, they can't criticize the government, but beyond that, they are free to do a lot of stuff that capitalist filmmakers in the West couldn't do. And to make my point even further is Eternals, Marvel's The Eternals, was hyped up. This is going to win Oscars. This is Marvel hiring Chloe Zhao, who just made the critically acclaimed Nomadland, and she's going to make this film that's going to look stunning, uses real locations, and is going to make Marvel more mature. And I've actually spoke about this before. Chloe Zhao shares the love of a filmmaker I really love, and that is Terrence Malick. Now, Terrence Malick isn't my favorite filmmaker, but he has made two of my favorite movies, The Thin Red Line and The New World. And Chloe Zhao actually loves The New World, and she loves Terrence Malick. I think I have a little clip of her talking about The New World.
Also, the filmmaker's curiosity towards trying to talk about humanity through nature, because it's not just us and nature. We're the same thing. We're part of the universe. So he's trying to really ask us to think that way in his filmmaking, and that dictates how he worked with his actor and how his cinematography works. I was very fortunate recently to be able to speak to one of the actors in the film, and he said that it was so intense, the reality that Malick has created on set, and the production design, and even the set builders was building Jamestown were in period costume. So when they go back to the hotel, that feels like a set.
But then she signs on to the Eternals and she directs this movie, and although there are some visual differences, it just feels like another MCU movie, and it didn't review well. And I've joked about this for a while, but I said if Terrence Malick made an MCU movie, it would look like every other single MCU movie, because directors are not free in the Marvel machine to really make what they want. Some are trusted more than others, like Taika Waititi, but at the end of the day, all these movies aesthetically look similar, all these movies really have no stakes, and all these movies really don't have a lasting impression in your mind. And even when someone who loves Terrence Malick, who makes a film like Nomadland, which you can even see the inspiration of Terrence Malick, and then she takes up the Eternals and it looks like every other Marvel movie, I think that shows how Marvel capitalism really does not allow filmmakers to make something that they want using the Marvel properties. And that's why, in a way, I respect DC a bit more, because even though I don't like their movies, no one can tell me Zack Snyder's The Justice League, Joker, and the Batman feel like they are made by an algorithm, feel like they're made by the same people, even though they have this moody, dark aesthetic. These are all very, very distinct. I also think it's telling that these movies wear their influences on their sleeve, like the Joker with Martin Scorsese, or with the Batman with David Fincher. But I think that is far better than just making something that is so forgettable and not distinct like every single Marvel movie. It's just like a larger conversation about how capitalism really stifles art. And you guys might have seen that trailer for the new like anti-communist Tetris film or whatever it is. But Tetris is so interesting to me in that here is a game, the best game of all time, one of my favorites of all time. I was playing it the other day, Tetris Effect, just got a new update. And here is a game where a guy just made it for fun, like so many people who do mods or make games that are free. And it's one of the best of all time because he wasn't pursuing the norm. He wasn't going after trends. He made a game that was fun, and his friends played it for free. Although this guy eventually acquired the rights to Tetris and became very, very rich and successful, to start with, he was just making art. He was just making something fun. He wasn't thinking about maximum profit or a profit incentive. He was working at a Soviet university and he made the best game of all time without thinking about these things. And I think it says so much that art can flourish when you are not worried about profitability in the capitalist system. So if you guys are thinking, wow, the MCU is so bad now. The MCU is so bad now because the directors and the creative talent do not have agency in making these films. Although something like the first Iron Man clearly is the vision of Jon Favreau, so many films in the MCU just feel like the exact same thing, and they're designed that way. You keep watching and they keep building it so they can keep extending it, so you feel like you have to see everything. Even like their Disney Plus shows now, if you don't watch them, you don't know what's going on in the movies, and it's absolutely ridiculous. You have to watch Loki to understand what happens in the new Ant-Man film. On that note, we're going to be talking about Ant-Man because it's a perfect example of just how much Marvel are just really not taking into account any quality anymore, because it's clearly one of the worst reviewed Marvel films in ages. But it's also a good case study to highlight how Marvel is both making these films on the backs of its workers and exploiting them for profit, but also that these films look terrible now because while exploiting these workers for profit, they're also not treating them fairly and they're overworking them, meaning the quality of the product is even worse. But they know people won't really care about that because they've made this machine where people will just watch anything they put out in absolute droves. While Iron Man had groundbreaking special effects Ant-Man looks like complete shit, and they know most people won't care, so let's get into this. So on Rotten Tomatoes, it now has 48% on the tomato meter, but 84% on the audience score. God, these movies are never going away. But there's one scathing review I want to read a bit more of by the Globe and Mail. Marvel's Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is fit to be squashed. So Reed's third Marvel outing is such a sloppy and rotten thing to stomach, interminable, ugly, and almost completely bereft of charm. The new film is both a dispiriting reminder that the MCU has abandoned wit and that even the most clever and idiosyncratic of filmmakers can be steamrolled by the unstoppable obligations of corporate storytelling, like I was saying earlier. Add in a sleepy Bill Murray cameo, a few visually incomprehensible action set pieces, and lots of dry as dust Kang monologues that will only make sense to Marvel acolytes who paid careful attention to this dude's first MCU appearance in Loki, and you have the makings of a depressingly disposable thing. Coloured wall to fake wall with cheap looking CGI, the film looks like it was shot from inside the guts of a first generation iPhone. There's an aesthetic emptiness to it all that is soul crushing. And the less said about the character design of MODOK, the better. The villain is an aggressively garish creation that will make your eyes bleed when they aren't rolling. Decades of VFX innovation and countless billions of dollars spent to build imaginary on-screen worlds, and the darkly lit, painfully ugly nothingness of the quantum realm is the best that Hollywood can come up with. And even some of this sentiment seems to be shared by the cast, who said they wanted to return to a smaller scale if they ever do an Ant-Man 4. Or we just talk about that review a bit more. Just a funny comment I found in the Marvel subreddit. Since when do people care about some critics who never touched a comic book in their life? Phase 4 has been diverse, strong, fun, funny, electric, and galvanizing. By all accounts, the train is going full speed ahead with memorable new exciting ideas in Phase 5. Never doubt Kevin Feige. Do so at your own peril. Stop panicking. Don't falter. Buy tickets. Watch the movie. If you don't quite get it, watch it again. Look for the details. Commit and you'll understand like it's long term. As Marvel fans, it's our duty to support our dreams on the screen. Don't let some paid critic haters who want hate clicks, by the way, tell you where your heart should be. Look, if you like the MCU films, you can like them, but this kind of mindset is so common in the MCU fan base, like just consume product because it's like what we like and we're seeing it on screen. Don't actually ever have a critical thought about it, just keep consuming. But that review like echoes my own sentiments, and I haven't even watched the film, just how, you know, there are so many limits to storytelling, not only in a capitalist film market, but within the capitalist film market in the MCU, there's only so much you can do to make this interesting, and it feels like this is all directed from the top. Like Ant-Man is doing Quantumania to set up other things, because even the cast don't really like the direction this Ant-Man franchise is going. So that hopefully shows you how this capitalist system does really stifle art, does really stifle innovation, because if people were making these films to be as entertaining as possible, tell an interesting story, push forward special effects, you wouldn't get Ant-Man Quantumania, you wouldn't get The Eternals, you wouldn't get all of this garbage that has been coming out lately. And again, nothing I've said so far has anything to do with the politics of the film, anything to do with supposed wokeness, supposed leftist messages in these films. Even though these films' liberal messaging is often really ham-fisted, it is not the problem. The problem is everything me and this reviewer said. But like the reviewer touched on, Ant-Man just looks terrible. Like, the VFX are garbage in this film, and it's not because the people working in the special effects team are not talented. It's not that they haven't worked on plenty of other projects that have good effects. It's that Marvel treats them like trash, overworks them and underpays them, and actually people have come out and spoke about Ant-Man specifically, so let's get into that. So an article by Chris Lee at Vulture reported on this. Honestly, I equate it to human greed. So I interviewed various people for this feature, and I'm just going to read some of what they said. So Jin is a visual effects technician who has worked on more than half a dozen Marvel movies and series, and says many of his experiences working for Hollywood's most reliable blockbuster factory have been positive. the effects house that employed him worked on post-production for Quantumania and the latest Black Panther. For Ant-Man, there are a lot of editorial changes happening towards the latter third and fourth of the project that were just too late. There's a point of no return. Why certain things were changed, why certain notes were nitpicked longer than they should have been, that's on Marvel. But it definitely did cause a lot of tension, turmoil, and weight on everybody at the company. Unfortunately, it's noticeable that there were shortcuts. Certain things were used to cover up incomplete work. Certain cuts were made to not show as much action or effect as there could have been, likely because there just wasn't enough time to render everything. There was a lot of shortening and rolling of shots. It really did feel like certain scenes were trimmed or otherwise altered to either save money, time, or cover up the inability to get it done. Why didn't we push back? You don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize your livelihood. Part of that means when an executive decision comes down the line that says, this is what we're going to do, you just assume you don't have the power to say anything against it. You can't be like, well, that's kind of shitty. Shouldn't we do something better? Because that will never happen. A lot of us are sitting here thinking, the money is there. Why is it not coming down? Marvel spending a bit more money to pay more VFX people wouldn't make that much of a difference for the executives at the top. But if it comes down to them not being comfortable with their bank numbers and us working until burnout, we lose every time. Honestly, I equate it to human greed. So just to stop there, I think it encapsulates everything wrong. So these people working on Ant-Man were given changes really, really late. So therefore, they had to cut corners, make the film worse because these executives couldn't stop meddling in the project and given them unrealistic deadlines. And like he was saying, if it's going to be some executives don't get paid as much and the VFX workers get paid better, or more of them get hired, the exec's pay is going to be prioritized every single time. And doesn't that encapsulate everything wrong with capitalism in a nice, like, Marvel wrapped nutshell? It's just like everything under capitalism. If you can do cuts, if you can overwork yourself and you can still release it and people will watch it, then what's the problem? Because they don't care about the craft anymore. They care about pumping out this garbage so people pay for the tickets and make the execs richer. And also the point about them not being able to say anything, that's of course common in so many industries. And it's even worse because Marvel can literally make or break these VFX companies because it's like their biggest client, especially at the moment. So what are these people going to say? They're going to say no to Marvel, which makes the most money every single year, and by extension it's also Disney as well. So they have all the Star Wars stuff and they have all the Marvel stuff. Your boss at your company is either going to stand up to them and say, well, you don't treat us well, we're not going to work for you. Or this person is meant to go to their boss of the company and say, well, we're not going to work anymore, because then they'll just get fired and replaced. Because just like so many technical industries, be it gaming or special effects in movies, it's so competitive. And because it's so competitive and people want to pursue their dreams, there is going to be someone to replace you who sadly will do that work. And because of these like more technical industries don't have great unionization in America, like in gaming and in special effects, these people cannot collectively bargain. They cannot stand up for themselves because unions are not strong in these industries. So Kevin Feige has recently said that Marvel Studios will slow down the release of shows and space Disney Plus series out more because he's noticing the recent projects are getting a ton of criticism and loads of people saying they're terrible now. And if you just keep this up, although loads of people will still flock to see these, you're not going to have the audience that you could have had. Like if you make every MCU movie aim to be like the first Iron Man movie in terms of quality, then you're probably on a good path, not just lazily throwing something out like Ant-Man Quantumania and cutting corners on the production and hoping people won't notice and they'll still like it as much as they liked the old MCU movies like Captain America's and Iron Man films. So IGN did a good article after She-Hulk got a ton of criticism for its own bad special effects, and they just touch on something I think's interesting, and it's more about how people feel like they can't really speak up. So pressure, crunch, blacklist fears, the MCU's visual effects artists speak out. Just moving on through the article. Right now, there's no leverage, IGN's second source said. You just do whatever the client says, because if you annoy them or if the relationship strains, you're out of multiple projects. The studios have no way of reining them in. As far as the power dynamic, they have all the control, they have all the power. Anyone will do it. There are plenty of other companies that will gladly take the work or will undercut you to get the work, and then they'll be suffering and they'll be working just as many hours, if not more. I've seen companies bend over backwards to do stuff for them. If artists were to unionize, that would give the artists more power to say, these are our terms, and it would force Marvel and the VFX houses to change their bidding practices, change how hard they're pushing things. It's just capitalism, right? All these studios want the work, Marvel wants it for as cheap as possible, so I don't really think that will change. Unionization would ideally mean that it would allow setting floors on artist compensation, and artists would have more recourse when it comes to things like how much overtime they do. That would mean that the VFX houses would also have to take on that floor of costs and bid according to the amount of overtime they can max out with. In turn, that means Marvel and other clients would then have to accept more realistic bids and have more financial incentive to be more judicious with the amount of reworked notes and have to plan out their projects better from the get-go. So obviously reiterating a lot of the things we've been discussing, saying how to the studios that they can't really say no, and because they don't have unions, what are they meant to do? Because if one studio says no, another will say yes, and that's just how bad capitalism is when there are no unions. And the problem is, you'd need a lot of these workers to push for unionization, because if one studio has good unions, then at the rate Marvel's going right now, they're always going to seek the cheapest possible option, because it's pretty clear with their recent output, they don't care about the effects. Like, they watch those movies, they know the effects aren't up to standard, they know the effects are worse than movies that came out like nearly 15 years ago, but they don't care because they know, well, people are going to go watch Quantumania because they need to watch it. And if they watch Loki, they're going to want to watch it because they realize it has the same villain, and they feel like it's like homework where they're just going to consume the product, and they don't really care about the movie because we've cultivated this market now where people will automatically go see this film. And from all reports, Ant-Man's doing pretty well. The only place I saw it was bombing was pretty much China. Everywhere else it was doing well. So clearly the quality of Ant-Man and the quality of the special effects aren't actually affecting things in the short term. But in the long term, you're seeing more and more people turn against the MCU. Like, when I used to talk about on Twitter like how much I hated the MCU, people would get really, really mad. And now every time a new MCU movie comes out, I just see everyone tearing it apart, everyone laughing at it, and everyone saying, look how terrible this looks. And then, of course, you have right-wing reactionaries also say, well, it's bad because it's woke. But in every normal person's opinion, it's not bad because it's woke. It's bad because it looks terrible. It's bad because it's boring. It's bad because it's the same stuff you've already seen a million times. And like George Lucas said with capitalism, it puts film into such a narrow box of like marketability and what audience wants. Marvel takes that to an even more insane degree, where that box is even smaller, where you literally just have to make your new movie, regardless of who you are, make it look like the other 20 movies that has already come out. So clearly, capitalism is ruining Marvel films, because in capitalism, these people are trying to pursue maximum profit, as much profit as possible, and they aren't breaking the laws in our capitalist system, so they seek out the cheapest workers as possible, and they overwork them, and they really, really take the piss of these people, so they're overworked, and they have to put out bad work to fit in with the timeline. But of course, if it keeps making their money, Marvel are never going to change, and that is how it's ruining it, because ideally what you would have is all these VFX studios be unionized, meaning they could set realistic boundaries with Marvel, and they could put out the quality work they're clearly capable of with lots of other projects, and they wouldn't have to allow Marvel to dictate and basically like ruin their own projects artistically. But again, at the moment, it's not actually ruining it in terms of profit, so they're probably happy enough, although Kevin Feige saying they might start delaying the releases. Maybe he's realizing people are getting generally fatigued with these. I'm not seeing any like noise on the front of, yeah, we should treat the VFX workers better, and we shouldn't be making these people like offer their services at like the lowest price and allow us to exploit them the most just so we can make the most profit. But again, we live in a capitalist system. Marvel is taking over the film industry. People will keep seeing these movies no matter what, it seems like. So is there anything to be done? Can anything be done? I guess the only thing is, if the next few movies come out and they're actually terrible, like Ant-Man, maybe people will stop watching them, and hopefully as part of people thinking these movies are bad, they'll identify that people do actually have a problem with the visual effects making the movie look terrible. So maybe we should change our practices with the special effects artists. But again, I'm not hopeful. So hopefully you guys, you've realized how capitalism is the main problem with the MCU becoming bad. It's not wokeness, it's the MCU stifling very, very talented directors, making them fit into this box, and it's also them cutting corners so they can make as much money as possible because they do not care about the art, they do not care about the film's quality, they care about the money, and at the moment, these films make money. Even Ant-Man, reviewing poorly, is making money, so we'll see what happens in the future. Anyway, that is it for the video, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.